Millionaire risked his life to save strange girl from car accident, and miracle happened to them. In this heart-pounding and inspiring YouTube video, we delve into the incredible story of a millionaire who risked everything to save a stranger. His life took an unexpected turn when he came across a devastating car accident. It was a moment that would alter the course of his life forever. If you're excited about this story, please let us know. If you enjoyed the video, please press 1. If not, press 0. Your feedback has inspired me to collect more uplifting and meaningful stories.
The sound of the engine roaring was unmistakable, but before Elena could react, the car was already heading straight for her with alarming speed. She felt the cold rush of adrenaline surge through her veins as she tried to move, but her legs wouldn't cooperate. The wet pavement, after the torrential rain, caused her feet to slip. Her grandfather, sick and frail, was waiting at home, and she couldn't fail him. Not after everything she had done to take care of him. Elena, with her simple clothes and face marked by constant worry, could only think of one thing. What would happen to her grandfather if something happened to her? But there was no time to think. The car was too close now. And then he appeared. The tall, imposing figure of Ethan Blake emerged from a corner of the street, almost like a savior. The millionaire businessman, owner of several companies and known for his magnetic presence, was about to pass by. Without hesitation, he saw the out-of-control car coming and, in an almost instinctive move, ran toward Elena. With a swift motion, he grabbed her forcefully and shoved her with all his strength. The impact was inevitable, but it wasn't her who was hit. Instead, it was him. Ethan's body slammed into hers, absorbing the collision from the car that sped by them, leaving them both on the ground. The sound of the car driving away was drowned out by the sound of Ethan's labored breathing. He was on top of her, his heavy body shielding hers from further injury. Elena, still dazed, felt the warmth of his body, and for a moment she thought she had failed to protect herself. But he was there, his face pale and covered in sweat from the pain. "What? What did you do?" Elena murmured, trying to understand what was happening. She looked at him with a mix of confusion and gratitude. Ethan blinked several times, trying to regain his composure from the pain. "I couldn't let you get hit. You were in danger." He helped her to her feet, still struggling to keep his balance, but his hands never left hers. Elena looked at him, her heart pounding not just from the shock, but from the connection she could feel building between them. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice trembling. Ethan nodded slowly, but what he felt was something different than relief. Something that unsettled him and, at the same time, intrigued him. He was looking at her as if he had known her his entire life, even though he had never seen that face before. "I am now. And you? Did you get hurt?" Ethan asked, gently touching her arm, his voice now softer. It was an unexpected change for someone so used to controlling everything around him. Elena frowned. "No, I didn't get hurt, but what about you?" I'll survive." The answer came with a light smile, trying to hide the discomfort he was feeling. She didn't know what to think. He was a complete stranger, but he had thrown himself in front of her, risking his own life to protect her. That gesture didn't make sense. Why would he do that for her? A poor woman with no status or importance? "You shouldn't have done that," Elena said, now calmer, but feeling a wave of gratitude. Ethan shrugged, trying to disguise the emotional impact of the moment. It wasn't an option. She looked at him, her eyes still full of gratitude and surprise. Something about that scene had sparked something. Maybe the beginning of a connection she never knew could exist between two such different people. After the rescue, the two were now in a hospital, where Ethan insisted on making sure she received medical care. He, on the other hand, refused any kind of treatment to avoid drawing attention. When Elena insisted that he be seen, he simply looked at her with a calm smile, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "I'll be fine," he said, holding her hand gently. But they both knew nothing would ever be the same after that moment. After the incident, Elena returned home, still feeling the weight of the experience. Her grandfather, seeing the worried expression on Elena's face, insisted that she rest, but she couldn't shake the image of Ethan from her mind. His gesture of saving her life had deeply affected her, but it also brought with it an uncomfortable feeling of owing him something, a debt she didn't know how to repay. Meanwhile, Ethan, in his luxurious home, couldn't stop thinking about her. The smile of the woman, the sensation of having protected her. It all seemed to make no sense, but at the same time, something inside him began to form. He couldn't push away that thought. What did it mean? He didn't know, but one thing was certain: their lives had irrevocably changed. The days after the accident were a blur for Elena. Between worrying about her grandfather's health and managing her job at the local diner, she couldn't find the time to process everything that had happened with Ethan. It seemed impossible to ignore, though. The image of him throwing himself in front of her, the strength and determination in his eyes, it lingered in her mind like a haunting melody, replaying over and over. She tried to push it out of her head, to focus on the mundane aspects of her life, but every time she closed her eyes, she saw his face. His kindness, his quiet strength, but most of all, the way he had looked at her in the hospital room, like she was someone worth protecting. One evening, while Elena was wiping down tables at the diner, a figure entered the door, his sharp silhouette unmistakable against the glow of the streetlights outside. Ethan. He looked out of place, his expensive suit and polished shoes a stark contrast to the humble setting of the diner. Elena's heart skipped a beat, and she quickly looked down, hoping he wouldn't recognize her, or worse, think she was staring. But Ethan's eyes found hers almost immediately. He walked over with that same calm confidence, the kind that made him seem both intimidating and oddly comforting at the same time. "Elena, right?" His voice was warm, and despite the suit and the aura of wealth around him, there was a softness in the way he spoke to her. "I didn't expect to find you here." Elena swallowed hard, wiping her hands nervously on the rag. "Yeah, this is where I work. Can I help you with something?" Her voice was shaky, unsure of why he was here. Was he just passing by? Did he recognize her from the accident? Ethan glanced at the menu board above her head, but then immediately looked back at her with a smile that made her feel strangely at ease. "I was actually hoping we could talk," he said, his tone gentle. "If you have a moment?" She hesitated, caught off guard by his request. This wasn't how she imagined her life would go. She wasn't supposed to be sitting down for coffee with a millionaire. But then again, she wasn't supposed to be saved by one either. "Sure," she said finally, nodding toward a corner booth. "Take a seat. I'll be right with you." As she walked to the back to grab his order, her mind raced. What was he doing here? Was he just being polite, or did he have some sort of ulterior motive? She returned a few minutes later with a cup of coffee in hand and slid into the seat across from him. The tension between them was palpable, but it was different than before. It was no longer about the accident. It was about them. Both of them. Their lives had collided in an unexpected way, and now it seemed like they were caught in the aftermath. "I wanted to check in on you," Ethan began, taking a sip of his coffee. "I know you must be going through a lot with your grandfather's health, and I wanted to make sure you're all right." Elena stared at him, surprised. "You came here to check on me? Why?" Ethan's expression softened. "Because I've been thinking about that day. What happened, and how I couldn't just walk away. There's something about you, Elena. Something I can't quite explain." Elena's heart skipped. Could he be serious? Her first instinct was to pull away, to remind herself that he was a man from a world so far removed from hers. He was wealthy, powerful, and she was just Elena, a woman trying to make ends meet, desperately trying to care for the man who had raised her. She couldn't afford to get caught up in this, but as she met his gaze, she saw something different in his eyes. A vulnerability, a softness. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't the only one who had been affected by that moment. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. I don't even know why you would care about me. I'm just a waitress with a sick grandfather. You have your life, your world. I don't belong in it." Ethan reached across the table, his hand gently brushing hers, sending a strange warmth through her. "You don't have to say anything," he replied. "I just want to be here for you. That's all." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Elena's chest tightened. She wanted to pull away, to dismiss his feelings as some fleeting moment of kindness, but deep down, she knew it wasn't that simple. They both knew this wasn't just about the accident anymore. It was about two lives that had collided in the most unexpected way, and the undeniable pull between them that neither could deny. Days passed since their unexpected meeting, but Elena couldn't seem to shake the feeling that her life had somehow been permanently altered. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Ethan, his presence so tangible in her mind. His words, his touch, and the way he had looked at her. It was almost as if he had become a part of her world, even though she had no idea what his true intentions were. She tried to focus on the mundane. Her shifts at the diner were exhausting, and her grandfather's condition was not improving. Elena found herself worrying constantly, trying to balance the demands of work and caregiving, but something kept pulling her thoughts back to Ethan. Why had he come to the diner that night? Why hadn't he just walked away like everyone else would have? But despite her confusion and doubts, a part of her couldn't ignore the way he had made her feel. Safe, seen. It was a strange feeling, one she hadn't experienced in years. One evening, after another long shift, Elena arrived home to find her grandfather resting quietly in his chair. The house smelled of medicine, and the soft hum of the television was the only sound filling the otherwise silent room. She sighed, dropping her bag on the floor and walking over to check on him. "Grandpa?" she whispered, kneeling beside him. "How are you feeling today?" His tired eyes fluttered open and a faint smile appeared on his face. "Better, Elena. Much better. But I can see something's bothering you. Is everything all right?" She hesitated for a moment before speaking. "It's just a lot of things, Grandpa. Work, the bills, and this accident that happened a few days ago." He raised an eyebrow, concern flickering across his features. "What accident?" Elena bit her lip, trying to find the right words. "I was almost hit by a car, but someone saved me." Her grandfather sat up straighter. "Someone saved you? Who?" "His name is Ethan," Elena said softly, glancing down. He's a millionaire, Grandpa. He's not like us. He's got everything, and I'm just me, a waitress trying to get by." "Is he someone you can trust, Elena?" her grandfather asked, his voice soft yet knowing. She paused, considering. "I don't know, Grandpa, but he was there when I needed him. He saved my life." Her grandfather reached out and gently patted her hand. "Sometimes, Elena, the world sends us people for a reason. Don't be so quick to push them away." His words lingered in her mind, a reminder that life had a way of bringing people together, even if it seemed impossible. Later that evening, as Elena sat on the small balcony outside her apartment, lost in thought, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She glanced at the screen. Ethan Blake. Her heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected to hear from him again so soon. She hadn't even given him her number, yet here it was. She swiped the screen, her thumb shaking just slightly. "Hello?" "Elena." Ethan's voice came through, smooth and warm, as if they were picking up right where they had left off. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "No, not at all," she replied quickly, though her mind was racing. "I just wasn't expecting to hear from you. I've been thinking about you." Ethan admitted without hesitation. "About what happened that day, and about you." Elena took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. "I don't understand, Ethan. You're a millionaire. Why are you even interested in someone like me? I'm just ordinary. I don't have anything to offer you." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and when Ethan spoke again, his voice was serious, almost as if he were choosing his words carefully. "Elena, you don't have to offer me anything," he said quietly. "You don't have to be anything other than who you are. That's more than enough for me." Her chest tightened at his words. She wanted to believe him, but the fear of being deceived, of getting caught up in something she didn't fully understand, held her back. "I don't know if I can trust you," she whispered. Ethan was silent for a moment. "You don't have to trust me right now, but I would like to get to know you better. Maybe we could meet again, just talk. No expectations. I just want to understand you, Elena." Her heart beat faster. It was tempting, more than tempting, but she had to be careful. She couldn't let herself get swept away by this man, no matter how much he intrigued her. "I don't know," she replied, the hesitation thick in her voice. "I have a lot on my plate right now. I'm not sure if it's the right time." Ethan's voice softened, a quiet understanding in his tone. "I understand, but just know that I'm here, Elena. And when you're ready, I'll be waiting." With that, the line went silent, and Elena was left with the sound of her own breathing, the phone still pressed to her ear. She looked out at the city lights, a mixture of emotions swirling inside her. She didn't know what to make of Ethan. Was he truly different from the world she had come from? Or was he just another rich man trying to fix his own boredom by saving a woman in distress? But deep down, she knew she wanted to find out. The days that followed were filled with the hum of Elena's ordinary life, waking up early, working long shifts, and caring for her grandfather. But even amidst the routine, Ethan lingered in her mind. She couldn't seem to escape him. The more she tried to focus on her work, the more his words echoed in her thoughts. "I'll be waiting." It had been a week since their last conversation, and though she tried to keep her distance, there was something about him that made her feel alive, as if she mattered to someone outside of her responsibilities and struggles. That afternoon, as she was finishing a shift at the diner, she caught sight of a familiar face in the doorway. Ethan. He stood there, leaning casually against the frame, his sharp suit and confident stance drawing the attention of every patron in the room. But he wasn't looking at them. He was looking directly at her. Her heart thudded in her chest, and she quickly wiped her hands on her apron, unsure of what to do. She hadn't expected him to show up. She hadn't even thought about the possibility. He smiled, a slight smirk on his lips as he took a few steps toward her. "Elena," he greeted her with the same warm voice. "I hope I'm not interrupting your shift." She swallowed, trying to remain composed, but her nerves betrayed her. "Ethan, what are you doing here?" "I wanted to see you again," he said simply, "and maybe get you out of here for a little while. Take you to dinner?" The words caught her off guard. Dinner? With him? A man who could have anything he wanted, who had the world at his feet? Why would he want to spend time with someone like her? She had no glamour, no wealth, just the weight of the world on her shoulders. But still, a part of her wanted to say yes. A part of her wanted to see if there was something real between them. I don't know, Ethan," she said, stepping back slightly, unsure of herself. "I don't know if it's a good idea. You don't need to be spending time with someone like me." Ethan's gaze softened, and he took a step closer, his voice quieter now. "You're not someone like you, Elena. You're you. And I've been thinking about you every day since that accident. Don't you want to find out what this is between us?" Her chest tightened, the battle between her heart and her mind waging within her. She had spent so long pushing people away, guarding herself from pain. Could she really let someone like Ethan in? Someone who seemed so out of her reach? "You don't have to say yes," he continued, his hand gently brushing against hers, grounding her. "But I think we should at least try. We deserve that much, don't we?" The sincerity in his voice was undeniable. She had always been cautious, always thinking of the worst, but something in his words made her reconsider. Maybe she was overthinking it. Maybe she just needed to live a little. Elena met his eyes, the pull between them undeniable. "Okay," she said softly. "Dinner. But just dinner. I can't promise anything beyond that." A genuine smile spread across Ethan's face, one that made her stomach flutter. "I'm not asking for anything more, Elena. Just dinner. Let's see where it takes us." As they walked out of the diner together, the cool night air greeted them. Ethan's car, sleek and polished, was parked just outside. He opened the door for her, the gesture so simple, yet it made her feel like she mattered. Dinner was quiet at first. They ate at an upscale restaurant, one that Elena knew she couldn't afford, but Ethan didn't seem to notice. He was more interested in her than the lavish surroundings. She couldn't help but notice how different he was from the men she had known before. He wasn't trying to impress her with his wealth, but rather with his kindness and attentiveness. "So," he said after a while, setting down his fork, his gaze never leaving her face. "Tell me more about you, about what you've been through. What makes Elena Elena?" Elena looked at him, unsure how to answer. She had never really shared much of herself with anyone. Most of her life had been about surviving, about taking care of her grandfather, making sure the bills were paid, and trying to keep her head above water. There hadn't been time for dreams or plans, or even much of a future beyond the immediate. "I guess I've always had to work hard," she said slowly. "My grandpa raised me after my parents passed away, and now, with him sick, it's all on me to make sure he's okay. I don't really have time for anything else, you know?" Ethan nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I understand. But I think you deserve more than just surviving, Elena. You deserve to live, to have dreams, to have someone care about you beyond all of that. You deserve more than just getting by. Her heart fluttered at his words, and she looked away for a moment, unsure how to respond. His gaze was so intense, so genuine. He wasn't just saying things to flatter her. He truly seemed to care. I don't know if I'm ready for that, she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. Ethan reached across the table, his hand gently touching hers. You don't have to be ready right now, but I'm here, and when you are, I'll be waiting. Her chest tightened again, but this time it was different. Instead of fear, there was a warmth spreading inside her. Maybe, just maybe, she could take a chance on him. Take a chance on herself. The evening ended too quickly for Elena. The night air felt colder now that they were back at the front of the diner, standing by his car. Ethan, ever the gentleman, opened the door for her again, his eyes never leaving hers as she hesitated for a moment before sliding into the passenger seat. The drive was quiet at first, the sound of the engine humming softly in the background. Elena couldn't help but steal glances at Ethan every now and then. His profile was sharp, his jawline defined, and the way he concentrated on the road only added to his intensity. But it wasn't just his looks that had captured her attention. It was his warmth, his kindness, and the way he made her feel as though she mattered, even when she wasn't sure of her own worth. As they pulled up to her small apartment building, Elena felt a wave of nervousness wash over her. She had gotten used to her quiet, solitary existence. But Ethan had made her feel something different. He had made her feel seen, like she wasn't invisible, like she could be more than just someone scraping by. You're home, Ethan said softly, turning off the engine. She nodded, unsure of how to respond. She didn't want him to leave, not yet. But she also wasn't sure if she was ready for whatever came next. Elena, Ethan started, his voice low, almost hesitant. I want to see you again. I want to be part of your life however that looks. But I can't just keep showing up and hoping you'll let me in. You have to want that too. Her breath caught in her throat. She had been so afraid of this moment, afraid of what would happen when the fantasy of the evening ended. But as she looked at him, she realized she didn't want it to end, not yet. I do, she said quietly. I want to see you again too, but I don't know if I'm ready for everything that comes with it. Ethan smiled, a genuine, reassuring smile. That's okay. I'm not asking for everything all at once, just a chance for us to see where this goes. She nodded, feeling a flutter in her chest. Maybe this was the beginning of something new. Maybe she didn't have to keep living in the shadow of her struggles. I'll be here when you're ready, he said, his voice gentle but firm. And I'll wait as long as it takes. Elena stepped out of the car, the cool night air enveloping her as she turned to face him. Thank you, she whispered, unable to find any other words to express the gratitude she felt. Ethan's gaze softened, and with one last glance, he drove off, leaving her standing in front of her building, her heart racing. As she made her way upstairs to her apartment, she couldn't help but smile. There was something in her chest, a feeling she hadn't experienced in a long time. Hope. Maybe it was foolish to hope for something better, something more than what she had. But Ethan made her feel like she could have more. And for the first time in a long while, she wondered if she truly deserved it. The following days were a blur. Elena's routine didn't change. She still worked at the diner, took care of her grandfather, and tried to manage the overwhelming weight of her life. But now, there was an underlying current of excitement in the back of her mind. She kept thinking about Ethan, about the way he looked at her with those intense, understanding eyes. Every moment she wasn't with him, she found herself wishing for the next time. And then, it came. It was another afternoon, another long shift at the diner, when Elena heard the bell above the door ring. She didn't look up at first, too focused on wiping down a table. But then she heard the voice, the one she'd been thinking about constantly over the past few days. Elena? She looked up, and there he was. Ethan stood in the doorway, a slight smirk on his lips as he scanned the room. His presence was magnetic, and for a moment, the hustle and bustle of the diner seemed to fade into the background. Hi, she said, surprised at how shy she felt. He walked over to her, his gaze never leaving hers. I thought I'd stop by, see how you're doing. Her heart fluttered. She had hoped he'd come, but now that he was here, she wasn't sure what to say. "I'm doing okay," she said, the corners of her lips curling into a smile. "You?" "Better now," he replied, his voice low and warm. "But I could use some company. You free after your shift?" Elena glanced at the clock. It was almost time to go home. She still had a few things to do for her grandfather. But, yeah, she said, without really thinking. "I'm free." Ethan smiled again, and for the first time, Elena felt the weight in her chest lift just a little. Maybe she could allow herself to let go, to take a chance on something that felt real, despite all the reasons not to. When her shift finally ended, Ethan was waiting for her outside, leaning casually against his car. As they drove to a nearby park, Elena found herself laughing and talking more than she had in a long time. Ethan was easy to talk to, and there was something so comforting about being with him. She felt like she could be herself, vulnerable, imperfect, and real. When they reached the park, they walked for a while, the silence between them comfortable. And then, as they stopped near a quiet bench overlooking the water, Ethan turned to her, his eyes serious. "Elena," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "I know this might be too soon, but I need to be honest with you. I've never felt this way about anyone before. I care about you, and I want to see where this goes. I want you in my life for as long as you'll let me be in yours." Elena's heart skipped a beat, the sincerity in his voice cutting through the air like a razor. She looked at him, searching his face for any signs of hesitation. But there was none, only certainty. "I care about you too," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper, and in that moment, something shifted between them. The connection that had been growing since their first meeting, the unspoken understanding, was no longer just a possibility. It was real. The next few days felt different for Elena. It wasn't just the excitement of her budding relationship with Ethan. It was the feeling that, for the first time in a long time, she was starting to live outside of her own limitations. Ethan had brought something into her life that she hadn't known she was missing. Hope. She had always been the one who had to hold everything together. The responsibility for her grandfather, the long hours at the diner, the pressure to keep her life from spiraling out of control. But with Ethan, it felt like she was allowed to dream again. Allowed to want something more. Her shifts at the diner had become almost bearable. Ethan would visit when he could, stopping by during her breaks, bringing her coffee, or just sitting with her for a few minutes. She had never expected to feel like she was the most important thing in someone else's world. But, with him, she did. It was as if he made time stop when they were together. But as much as she wanted to embrace this new reality, there was a part of her that held back. Fear. She knew all too well that good things didn't always last. She wasn't used to this kind of attention, this kind of care. She had never been the kind of person people fought for. She was used to standing on her own, doing things the hard way. The thought of relying on someone, especially someone like Ethan, was overwhelming. On the evening of their next date, Elena found herself in front of her mirror, nervously adjusting her outfit. She had planned to wear something simple, something she could feel comfortable in. But she found herself staring at the dress she had worn to the charity event with Ethan. She had loved the way he had looked at her in it, the way his gaze had made her feel like the most important woman in the room. With a sigh, she slipped into the dress again. Maybe tonight, she'd let herself feel special. Maybe tonight, she'd let herself take the chance. Ethan arrived just as she finished getting ready, his usual confident stride softened by the gentle look in his eyes when he saw her. "Wow," he said, his voice filled with admiration. "You look incredible." Elena felt her cheeks flush at the compliment, but she smiled anyway. "Thanks. You look good too." He stepped closer, offering her his arm with a charming smile. "Shall we?" Elena hesitated for just a moment before linking her arm with his. The evening felt different this time. Not just because of the dress or the fancy dinner they were heading to, but because there was a weight to the air between them. It felt like this was a turning point. Dinner was exquisite, the food delicious, and the conversation flowed as easily as it had every other time they'd been together. But there was a quiet undercurrent of tension. Elena could feel Ethan watching her, as if he was waiting for her to say something, waiting for her to let him in just a little bit more. After the meal, they took a walk around the city, the cool night air brushing against their skin as they strolled through the park. The lights from the surrounding buildings reflected off the lake, creating a shimmering path that seemed to lead them into the unknown. "So," Ethan began, breaking the silence, "how's your grandfather? I know you've been taking care of him." Elena smiled softly. "He's doing okay. He's still a bit weak, but he's hanging in there. I'm just trying to make sure he's comfortable." Ethan nodded, his expression softening with concern. "If you ever need help, Elena, you don't have to do it alone. You don't have to carry everything on your own shoulders." Her heart skipped a beat. She had been afraid to hear those words, afraid that it might mean he was trying to take over, trying to fix her life in ways she wasn't ready for. But his words weren't intrusive, they were sincere, coming from a place of care. "I'm not used to asking for help," she said quietly, her eyes on the path ahead. "I've always had to do everything myself. I don't really know how to let someone in." Ethan stopped walking, gently turning her to face him. "You don't have to let me in all at once," he said, his voice soft but certain. "But I want to be here for you, Elena, and I'm not going anywhere." For a long moment they stood there, the city lights casting a warm glow around them. Elena could feel the pull of his words, the sincerity in them. She wanted to believe him, but her heart ached at the thought of depending on someone else. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan's eyes softened and he stepped closer, his hand gently cupping her cheek. "I know you are, but I promise you, I'm not going to hurt you. I'll never make you feel like you're alone again." Elena felt a tear slip down her cheek, and for a moment she let herself lean into his touch. She had spent so long pushing people away, guarding her heart from the possibility of disappointment. But Ethan wasn't like the others. She could feel that now. "Okay," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Okay, I'll try. I'll try to let you in." Ethan's smile was soft and understanding as he pulled her into a gentle embrace. "That's all I ask." As the night came to a close, Ethan drove her back to her apartment, the car ride silent but filled with an unspoken understanding. When they arrived, Elena didn't want to say goodbye, but she knew it was time. She stepped out of the car and turned to face him, her heart racing. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice full of gratitude. "For everything." Ethan reached out and gently took her hand, his touch warm and reassuring. "I'll see you soon. Don't be afraid to lean on me, okay? You're not alone in this anymore." With one last lingering look, he drove off, leaving Elena standing in front of her building, her heart full of something new. Hope, love, and the promise of a future she had never dared to imagine before. The following days were filled with an unusual sense of anticipation for Elena. There was something electrifying in the air whenever she thought of Ethan. It was the kind of feeling that both thrilled and terrified her, the unknown that she had never ventured into before. For the first time, the idea of vulnerability didn't seem as scary, not when it was with him. Ethan, however, didn't push. He understood her pace, never rushing her, always respectful of her boundaries. It was one of the many things Elena had come to admire about him, the gentleness with which he navigated their budding relationship. But still, the question loomed in her mind. Could someone like him really want someone like her? She had never seen herself as anything special, just a girl working hard to keep her head above water. One afternoon, as she walked out of the diner after her shift, she was surprised to see Ethan waiting for her by the entrance, leaning casually against his sleek black car. His presence was commanding, even in moments like this, and yet he managed to make it seem like he was just waiting for her, like there was no other place he'd rather be. "Elena," he greeted her with a smile, his voice warm and inviting. "Hey," she replied, surprised and flattered. "What are you doing here?" "I came to take you somewhere," Ethan said, opening the door to the passenger side. "I know it's not the most convenient, but I've been meaning to talk to you about something." Her curiosity piqued. She slid into the seat, and the car pulled away from the curb. The city passed by in a blur as Ethan drove in the direction of the outskirts, where quiet roads and secluded areas seemed to promise a rare privacy. "Where are we going?" Elena asked, feeling the tension of the unknown build between them. "It's a surprise," Ethan answered, a hint of mischief in his voice. She raised an eyebrow. "A surprise? You're really building the mystery here." He chuckled, his eyes gleaming as he glanced at her for a second. I promise it's not a crazy idea, just trust me. Elena found herself smiling. She could feel the weight of her reservations starting to melt away in his presence. Ethan had a way of making her feel comfortable, even when everything inside her told her not to let her guard down. But for once, she was willing to take a chance. Eventually, they arrived at a scenic overlook, a quiet hill that offered a breathtaking view of the city. The skyline stretched out before them like a sea of lights, the stars twinkling above in the clear night sky. Ethan parked the car and led her to a wooden bench positioned perfectly to capture the beauty of the view. He motioned for her to sit beside him, and as she did, he sat close, but not too close. I've been thinking a lot about us, Elena, he said, his tone serious now. About what we mean to each other. Her heart skipped a beat. There it was. The unspoken tension they'd both been skirting around. I've been thinking about us too, she said, voice barely above a whisper. Ethan took a deep breath, turning to look at her. I want you to know that I'm serious about this. About you. Elena's heart fluttered, and she felt a wave of emotion surge through her. She had never expected this, never thought she'd be in a position where someone would say those words to her with such sincerity and intent. I don't want to rush you into anything, Ethan continued, his hand subtly brushing against hers. But I need you to understand that I'm all in. Whatever this is, whatever we're building together, I want it to work. I want to take this seriously. Elena's breath caught in her throat. She turned to look at him, really look at him. His eyes were filled with honesty, with a vulnerability that mirrored her own. And in that moment she knew he wasn't just saying these things to be kind. He meant them. You've already done so much for me, she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. You've given me something I didn't know I needed. I don't know how to handle this, all of this. Ethan gently squeezed her hand, his gaze softening. You don't have to handle it alone, Elena. You never will again. The words settled in her heart like a promise, a declaration of trust and care that she had never known. Her mind raced with a mixture of doubt and hope, but the more she looked at him, the more she felt her fears start to subside. She could do this. She could let herself love him. And as if reading her thoughts, Ethan leaned in closer, brushing a lock of hair behind her ear before placing a tender kiss on her forehead. You're not alone. I'm right here, with you, always. Elena closed her eyes for a moment, letting the comfort of his words wash over her. It felt like the first time in a long while that she had truly allowed herself to relax, to not worry about what came next. For once, she could just be with him. When she opened her eyes again, she met his gaze, her heart steady but filled with an excitement she couldn't suppress. I'm scared, she admitted, her voice steady but vulnerable. But I'm willing to try, Ethan. I'm willing to try with you. His smile was the answer she needed. His eyes shone with both relief and joy as he leaned in to kiss her. It was soft at first, as if testing the waters of their connection, but soon deepened into something that held all the promises of a future they both longed for. For the first time, Elena let herself believe in the possibility of something beautiful. A love that could be both powerful and gentle. Something she had once thought was beyond her reach, but now felt closer than ever. The days following their quiet night together were filled with an intensity that neither of them had anticipated. Elena's heart was still racing from the kiss, from the realization that she had finally allowed herself to be open to something real. Ethan had been respectful of her space since their conversation, never pushing her too far, but always present, always there when she needed him. But Elena's mind was restless, like a storm brewing inside her. She was still coming to terms with how much Ethan had come to mean to her. She had always kept her distance, guarding her heart fiercely, but with him, it felt different. It felt as if they were connected by something more than just circumstance. That afternoon, Elena had a rare moment of peace while at the diner. She was wiping down the counter, lost in thought, when she felt a tap on her shoulder. Turning, she was surprised to see her best friend, Emma, standing there, grinning widely. You're glowing, Emma teased, her eyes bright with curiosity. What happened? Is there something you're not telling me? Elena laughed nervously, wiping her hands on her apron as she tried to hide the blush creeping up her cheeks. What are you talking about? "Oh, come on," Emma said, leaning in closer. "You've got that look in your eyes, the same one you had when you talked about your first crush in high school." She smirked. "It's the Ethan effect, isn't it?" Alina's heart skipped a beat at the mention of Ethan's name. "What? No, of course not. I don't know what you're talking about." Emma raised an eyebrow. "Don't play coy with me, Alina. I've seen the way he looks at you. There's definitely something happening between you two, and I'm here for it. Just admit it already." Alina's cheeks flushed deeper, and she turned away, trying to distract herself with cleaning a glass. "It's complicated, Em. He's Ethan, and I'm just me." Emma crossed her arms, giving her friend a skeptical look. "And that's supposed to stop you? Alina, you deserve happiness. You deserve more than just working yourself to the bone to care for your grandfather. You deserve someone who will treat you like the amazing woman you are." Alina paused, looking at her friend with a mixture of gratitude and doubt. "I'm not sure I believe that," she whispered. "What if I'm just too ordinary for someone like him?" Emma's eyes softened, her tone becoming more serious. "You're not ordinary, Alina. You're extraordinary, and if you can't see that, then he doesn't deserve you. But from what I can tell, Ethan's different. He sees you. Don't let your insecurities hold you back from something that could be amazing." Alina swallowed, her mind swirling with Emma's words. Could it really be that simple? Could she really allow herself to embrace what was happening between her and Ethan? She wasn't sure, but the thought of losing him before even giving herself a chance felt worse than any fear she could imagine. That evening, as she closed the diner, Alina's heart raced. Ethan had been texting her all day, but she hadn't replied immediately, caught up in her thoughts. Now, standing outside, she couldn't ignore the pull she felt toward him. She took a deep breath, her fingers shaking slightly as she typed a quick message. "I'm off work. Are you still around?" Before she could set her phone down, it buzzed with a reply. "I'll be there in 10. Her pulse quickened at the thought of seeing him again. The way his presence had a calming effect on her, the way she felt both nervous and at ease when he was near, was something she hadn't experienced in a long time. When Ethan arrived, it was like he was a magnet pulling her toward him. As she walked toward his car, his eyes met hers with that same warm intensity she had grown accustomed to. He didn't say anything at first. Instead, he reached out and took her hand in his, squeezing it gently. "Are you all right?" he asked softly, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. Alina nodded, the smile on her face a little shaky but genuine. "Yeah, just thinking about everything." "I know," Ethan replied, his voice quiet. "I've been thinking a lot too, about you, about us." She felt her heart flutter at his words. "And what exactly have you been thinking?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "That I'm glad you didn't run away," Ethan said, his gaze locked with hers. "I've been waiting for you to be ready. And I'm willing to wait as long as it takes, Alina." Her breath caught in her throat at his words. For a moment she just stood there, absorbing what he was saying. She wasn't used to someone being so patient, so willing to be there for her. It was overwhelming, and yet, she didn't want to push it away. "I'm ready," she said, her voice trembling slightly as she squeezed his hand back. "I've been afraid, but I'm ready to try, Ethan." Ethan smiled, a wide, genuine grin that lit up his entire face. He leaned in, brushing a stray strand of hair behind her ear, before his lips found hers in a kiss that was tender, soft, and full of promise. When they finally pulled away, Alina's heart was racing in a way that was both exhilarating and terrifying. "You have no idea how happy that makes me," he murmured, his forehead resting against hers. "I'll make sure you never regret this, Alina. I promise." Her heart swelled with emotion. "I don't think I will," she whispered. The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind for Alina. It felt like she was walking in a dream, her heart full of emotions she wasn't sure she could fully grasp. Ethan had become a constant in her life, not just the man who had saved her, but someone she found herself thinking about constantly, someone she was starting to care about more deeply than she had expected. And every day, the idea of opening her heart a little more to him felt like both a risk and a beautiful possibility. It was a Sunday afternoon when everything shifted once again. Alina had just returned from her shift at the diner and was making her way home when she received a message from Ethan. "Can we talk?" Her heart skipped a beat. They had spent so many hours together, but the weight of his words made her pulse race in a different way. Of course, she quickly replied, her fingers trembling slightly. By the time she reached the small apartment she shared with her grandfather, Ethan was already waiting for her, standing outside, his hands in his pockets, looking more serious than she had ever seen him. "Elena?" He greeted her softly as she approached. His expression was unreadable, though his eyes held a vulnerability she hadn't seen before. "Can we sit for a moment?" She nodded, feeling a strange tension rising in her chest as they both moved inside. Her grandfather was still napping in the other room, so they had privacy to talk, although Elena couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. Once they were seated on the small couch, Ethan turned to her, his gaze intense. "I've been thinking a lot about everything. About you. About us." Elena's heart fluttered in her chest. She couldn't stop the nervous energy from bubbling up inside her. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice soft. Ethan took a deep breath, as if gathering his thoughts. "I've been keeping something from you. Something I think you need to know if we're really going to move forward." Elena frowned, suddenly feeling a pang of worry. "What is it, Ethan? You know you can tell me anything." He hesitated for a moment, his hands gripping the edges of the couch. I'm not just any millionaire, Elena. I don't just own some businesses. My family's company, well, it's one of the biggest in the country. I've been raised in this world of wealth and expectations, but that's not what I want. I want something real. I want you." Elena felt as though the world around her had come to a sudden stop. She stared at him, her mind trying to piece everything together. She had known Ethan was wealthy, but hearing him speak so plainly about his family's wealth and expectations made it feel different. The weight of his words was heavy, and the fear inside her began to rise. "You think that's going to change things between us?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, afraid of what the answer might be. "Because it doesn't have to." "No," Ethan quickly replied, shaking his head. "It's not about the money, Elena. I just wanted you to understand who I am, where I come from. I don't want to lose you because of who my family is, or because of how much I have. I want to be with you for who you are." Elena felt a swell of emotions she wasn't sure how to deal with. She had known he came from a different world, but hearing him speak so openly about it made it seem more real. Ethan had always been so kind, so gentle with her, and she wanted to believe that his feelings for her were genuine, not because of her circumstances, but because of who she was. But deep down, she couldn't shake the doubt that clung to her heart. She had always struggled with the idea that people from different worlds, people like Ethan, could ever understand the weight of her life. Her responsibilities, her struggles. "You don't have to say anything now," Ethan continued, his voice soft, almost pleading. "I just wanted to be honest with you. I care about you, Elena. I care about you more than I ever thought possible." A long silence fell between them. Elena's chest tightened as she tried to process everything. She had grown so used to being self-sufficient, to carrying the weight of everything on her own, that the idea of someone truly seeing her, not for her circumstances but for her, was both terrifying and beautiful. "I don't know what to say," she admitted, her voice thick with emotion. "I've never been with someone like you. I've never been in your world, Ethan. I can't just ignore everything that comes with it." Ethan leaned forward, his eyes earnest. "I don't want you to ignore anything, Elena. I want you to understand that what I'm offering is real. I am real, and I want you by my side, no matter what." Her eyes searched his face, looking for something, anything, that would give her the certainty she needed to take the next step. The soft determination in his gaze made something inside her stir. Maybe she didn't need to have all the answers right away. Maybe she didn't need to have everything figured out.